Hi, I'm Rich.
And I'm Tina.
If there's one thing we've learned in over 20 years of marriage,
It's that some days you'll feel like killing your husband.
and some days you'll feel like killing your wife.
Welcome to Love, Marry, Kill.
Hey, Tina.
Hey, Rich.
How are you today?
I'm okay. How are you?
I am doing pretty good.
Good.
I'm glad you came back.
Yeah, I honestly was a little upset after the last episode.
It
That
was
was,
a distressing case.
yeah, it was disturbing for sure.
Yeah, and I was actually I read an article this morning about emergency rooms and like they're overwhelmed. We've been watching The Pit lately, which I know we're a little late to the game on that, but it's a great show. And I've been thinking, it's a little bit, it's dramatized. It's really not that bad. But I was reading an article today that made me feel like, oh my gosh, emergency rooms are really just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And
Well, we live in a rural area, so the emergency rooms, when we've had occasion to go, have never been that busy.
yeah,
But if you're in a major metropolitan area like Pittsburgh,
yeah,
it's going to be a lot busier.
yeah. I remember when I went for my gallbladder, it felt like I had to wait forever. I know it wasn't really forever, but
Oh, you did have
I
to
was
wait
in,
longer
oh,
than
I
you
was in
should have, but
such
it
pain.
was a Thanksgiving weekend, so
Yeah.
I think that's why they were short-staffed, even though there weren't a ton of people in there, but there's
Yeah.
probably only one doctor.
For most people, this episode will air on October 27th, so right around Halloween.
Wow, it is October 5th when we're recording this,
We are
so
so far ahead of the game.
well, we won't be for long.
Are you feeling Halloween-ish yet?
Well, as we've mentioned before, we're empty nesters, so it feels kind of weird. I put up some fall decorations, but
Mhm.
it's just me and you here most of the time, so I
Yeah.
didn't go all out.
Well, I put our big black inflatable cat in the front yard, although,
From Hammock or Schlemmer, which
when,
we bought it last year.
yeah,
Love it. I mean, it's a great piece. It was expensive, but it's really cool, and the neighbor kids love it, and
Yeah.
it gives us a lot of great joy. I'll put a picture up of it, but
yeah. The cat's having some issues, though. The tail isn't standing up. I can't figure out why, but I need to go troubleshoot.
well, Hammock or Schlemmer is going out of business, which is a huge bummer.
Yeah.
So all of their things have a lifetime warranty.
Yeah,
so
so
that won't
maybe not
really-
so much anymore.
Which is when we bought it and we paid kind of a lot for it. We were like, well, if there's ever an issue, we can return it.
Yeah.
But now we're stuck with it. It's huge though. It's like 13 feet tall or something.
Yeah, it's really cool, and the eyes light up, and
Yeah.
it's really cool.
We love it. I know we need to get rolling on this episode, but you love a scary movie. If you had to give one recommendation right now, what would your recommendation be?
That answer is going to change depending on what day you ask me. But the first thing that popped into my mind, I'm going to go old school and say Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock.
Okay.
I'll never forget the first time I saw that movie. I was probably in my early 20s. It was on TV at like midnight, and I was at my mom's house, and I was staying up late, and I watched it. And I know it's like dated now, but it freaked me out.
I have never watched it for that reason because you take a shower every day, and I just feel like it would scare me. I am a high anxiety person anyway.
Yeah.
I'm the jumpiest person you'll ever meet, right? Like it doesn't take much to
I
make
walk
me,
into a room and
and I jump, and I'm like, oh, you scared me. I say that 100 times a day. So yes,
Yeah.
I'm very jumpy. So I have not watched that movie on purpose because I think it would disturb me.
all right, well, if you had to recommend one, what would you pick today?
Off the top of my head, I don't really know, but I like a good suspense movie.
Mm-hmm.
The other day, I had finished a two-part case, and I was like, I'm going to just watch a movie. And I watched The Drop, and that was on Peacock, I think. And it was really good.
Yeah.
So it was not really a horror movie, but it was scary. So if you have Peacock, I recommend watching The Drop.
I thought you were going to throw out Halloween because I know you're a fan of the classic kind of
Yeah.
slasher films.
Yeah, that movie is well. Whenever we've watched, we used to watch it every year on Halloween, but it's really long and it takes like 45 minutes to get to any drama, really.
It's
But,
a little slow to get
the music
going.
is great in that film,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Well, let us know if you have recommendations for a really good horror film.
it's been weird because it's so warm here. The leaves are just starting to turn now, but it hasn't felt like Halloween
No,
yet.
it really hasn't.
Normally, we'd be watching a scary movie every weekend, but we really haven't done that yet.
Yeah, soon. Well, I made you a snack
Yeah, with unflavored gelatin.
Yes.
Made me
And
a
you
snack
were
that tastes like nothing.
guessing what it was.
Yeah.
So what were you guessing?
Well, you had asked me last night, do we have any unflavored gelatin? And I think we used to, but we don't anymore. I'm not sure where it went, but I know that you need gelatin for like a chocolate cream pie, and you love a chocolate cream pie. So I thought it might be something to do with that.
Gotcha. It's not what it is.
Okay.
So, I like to do snacks, if I can, that tie into the location of the case.
Yeah.
Our case takes place in Buffalo. Previously, when I did a Buffalo case, I made you buffalo wings.
Right.
Didn't want those were really good, but I
Did
didn't
you
want to
make
do that again.
marshmallows?
No,
That's my other guess with unflavored gelatin.
I did a little Googling and I found a candy that Buffalo is known for called, I had never heard of, called sponge candy.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so.
It's going to look familiar to you because it's a lot like a candy that I know you are a big fan of.
Is it honeycomb?
Yes.
I've always wanted to make that homemade and I never have. That is one of my favorites for sure.
Yeah. Well, here it is. It looks perfect, but I think the inside is a little chewier. It's not as...
Actually, the flaw when you get the occasional chewy honeycomb.
Okay, well, you're going to like this. It might stick to your teeth, though.
Okay.
Well, what did you think about my sponge candy?
I think you're amazing. It's crazy to me that you just whipped that up this morning in our kitchen.
I like a good challenge.
You really do. I think it's because you only cook for the podcast, so when you get the opportunity, you're like excited to. But it looks like professional candy. And we have a store near us called World Market, and that's where you can get violet crumble?
Violet crumble.
Violet crumble. Yeah. And that's one of my favorites. Yeah. You usually put one in my Christmas stocking. And it looks just like violet crumble. It doesn't taste quite as good, but it's really good.
The honeycomb part came out definitely a little too dense and chewy, not as airy. And
I like the chewiness in it, but it could have just a smidge more flavor. Did you think it was maybe just a little bland compared to violet crumble? But for your first...
Maybe a little bit.
For your first time, incredible. And you did such a good... I can't believe you dipped. I mean, in this bowl, there's like 30 pieces. So you dipped like 30 pieces of honeycomb. So
I tempered the chocolate and I dipped it. And
well, bravo to you. I think the chocolate is a little dark for me. Is it like a 70%?
65.
Okay, but bravo to you. It's beautiful. There's nothing you can't do. I really enjoyed it quite a bit.
Good.
Thank you. If you hear any loud chewing during the podcast, that will be me eating this sponge candy.
Would you like to give us a quick recap of part 1?
Absolutely. In part 1, we introduced Dr. Anthony Pignataro, a Buffalo surgeon, and his wife, Debbie. Anthony came from a well-off family. His father was a prominent and well-respected surgeon, while Debbie grew up in a more blue-collar home. The couple had 2 children, Ralph and Lauren. Early in their marriage, Anthony began showing classic signs of narcissism. He saw himself as a brilliant innovator in the field of plastic surgery. In fact, he even invented a permanent hairpiece that attached to the scalp using tiny bolts embedded in the skull. That gave me nightmares. But behind the bravado, Anthony was a dangerously incompetent surgeon. He refused to admit mistakes and insisted on doing things his way, even setting up an operating room in the basement of his clinic where he performed cosmetic procedures without proper equipment or trained staff. It was only a matter of time before tragedy struck. That tragedy came in August 1997 when 26-year-old Sarah Smith went in for what should have been a routine breast augmentation. A week later, after she'd been kept alive on life support, her husband Dan made the heartbreaking decision to let her go on September 1st.
Anything that I left out of there that you think is worth noting?
We didn't really talk about it at the time that we were recording, but another patient of his died too, but that was during a different... Because he was an ear, nose, throat doctor before he focused on the cosmetic surgery.
Yeah, and that one wasn't quite as blatant. It was a 72-year-old man. I wasn't able to find out too much detail about that particular surgery, but that one might not have been, as blatantly obvious that Anthony screwed up, I guess.
Okay. But Anthony was not a good husband, and he had at least 2 affairs that we know of.
Yes, correct. In the days after the botched surgery, while Sarah Smith lay in a coma, Debbie was beside herself. Despite all the cruelty she had endured from Anthony, the infidelity, the insults about her weight, the constant belittling, she still believed he was a gifted surgeon. Debbie tortured herself with guilt, replaying that awful day in her mind. Had she waited too long to speak up when Sarah stopped breathing? Could she have somehow prevented the disaster? Anthony, on the other hand, didn't seem to lose much sleep over it. Almost immediately, he went back to work as if nothing had happened. He continued performing surgeries, including the same transumbilical breast augmentation surgery on another patient the day after Sarah's surgery. He believed that. He has a patient die because of his incompetence, and then the next day he goes back in, does the exact same surgery on another patient.
Yeah, that's horrifying.
In fact, Anthony performed even more surgeries than usual, trying to squeeze in as many paying patients as possible in case the Department of Health pulled the plug on his practice. In the evenings, he hit the gym as usual, had maybe a few extra drinks, and carried on with life overall. For Dan Smith, there was no carrying on. His 26-year-old wife was gone. At her wake in West Seneca, the grief was overwhelming. The story had been splashed across the news, and the crowd of mourners overflowed the funeral home. Sarah was buried beside her brother, across from the church where she and Dan had exchanged vows a few years earlier.
That's right. Her brother died young from muscular dystrophy,
That's right.
And they were really close.
Yes. Friends urged Dan to sue, but vengeance wasn't what he wanted. He didn't even care if Anthony went to prison. His only wish was to make sure this man never harmed another family again. Eventually, though, Anthony's malpractice insurer did offer a settlement, and Dan set the money aside in a fund for the children that Sarah would never get to raise. Meanwhile, the West Seneca police and the district attorney launched their investigation. Normally, botched surgeries end up in civil court, not criminal, but after hearing Dan's account, the DA was convinced this case was different. Anthony Pignataro hadn't just made a mistake. His recklessness was criminal. Investigators Pat Finnerty and Chuck Craven were assigned to get to the truth. What they uncovered was staggering. When they interviewed Anthony, he claimed his lawyers had told him not to talk, but then he immediately launched into a self-serving version of events, glossing over every possible mistake. Debbie and 17-year-old Tom Watkins, a high school kid who worked part-time in the office, gave consistent accounts of the chaos that unfolded that day. In fact, Tom, the teenager, provided the clearest, most detailed description of what had happened in that operating room. Then there was Janie, the 24-year-old LPN. She was the only other person in the room with any medical training, but her interview left investigators stunned. She admitted she didn't know what half the drugs were that she had been injecting. She just did whatever Anthony told her to do. When asked what it meant if a patient's oxygen levels dropped below 85, she shrugged. "I don't know, but I know it's not good." She called a scalpel that sharp thing, she couldn't remember the name, and she referred to the ambu bag, a basic life-saving tool, as the bamboo bag, or the little masky thing you put on someone's face when you want them to breathe. This was the team that Anthony Pignataro had assembled to administer general anesthesia in a dingy basement. The autopsy confirmed what Dan and Sarah's family already knew in their hearts. Sarah hadn't died of some mysterious condition or hidden defect. She had been given a cocktail of powerful drugs, lidocaine, codeine, diazepam, midazolam, thiopental, at doses so high they shut down her ability to breathe. And with no ventilator in the room, no competent staff to help her, she suffocated. The official cause of death? Asphyxia due to inadequate ventilation under anesthesia. Armed with a warrant, investigators combed through Anthony's basement operating room. The setup was shocking. Outdated, unsafe equipment for general anesthesia, and diplomas hanging on the wall that turned out to be forgeries. On August 29th, even before Sarah was taken off life support, the Department of Health suspended Anthony's medical license. But Anthony didn't see himself as the problem. In his bizarre journal we talked about in part 1, a manuscript he called MD, Mass Destruction, he painted himself as the victim. He blamed Sarah, claiming she had done cocaine the night before surgery, which was not true. He blamed the hospital for removing her from life support. He even claimed her heart and liver were defective despite the autopsy proving otherwise. To Anthony, everyone else was at fault. The patient, the hospital, the DA, the media, anyone but him.
In January 1998, the district attorney decided to put Anthony Pignataro's case before a grand jury. Witnesses were subpoenaed, documents were pulled, and the evidence wasn't limited to Sarah Smith's death. The jury also heard about Anthony's treatment of Terry Lamarty.
Terry, we talked about in part 1, a few weeks before Sarah Smith came in, he botched a tummy tuck on her and she went to the ER. She was lucky to survive.
Okay, that's right. The grand jury returned 6 indictments: manslaughter in the second degree for recklessly causing Sarah's death by asphyxia, criminally negligent homicide, assault in the second degree for causing serious injury through reckless use of drugs, falsifying business records in the first degree for lying in his surgical report, reckless endangerment in the second degree for trying to discharge Terry Lamarty from the hospital too soon, criminal possession of a forged instrument in the third degree for hanging a fake American Board of Otolaryngology diploma on his wall. The manslaughter charge carried the heaviest penalty, up to 15 years in prison. Anthony was stunned, outraged. How could anyone accuse him of being a criminal? The attorneys urged him to consider a plea bargain. Doctors almost never faced criminal charges for malpractice, and it was impossible to predict how a jury might view this case. The DA wasn't out for blood. Their priority was simply to make sure Anthony Pignataro would never endanger another patient again. But Anthony saw himself as the victim. He refused to admit guilt. He was determined to fight. Through it all, Debbie stayed by his side. Her belief in his surgical skills had finally started to waver, but for appearances, and maybe out of sheer habit, she stood with her husband. What she didn't know was that while she defended him publicly, Anthony was seeing another woman named Tammy, who he'd met at Gold's Gym earlier in 1997. As the trial date loomed, Anthony's bravado gave way to practicality. He struck a deal. He pled guilty to criminally negligent homicide. As part of the plea, he agreed to permanently surrender his medical license and to give up any right to appeal his sentence. That is very surprising.
It is a little surprising that he would give that up. He must have seen the writing on the wall, that he knew it was going to happen one way or another.
On August 4th, 1998, Anthony appeared in court for sentencing. True to form, he couldn't resist turning the spotlight back on himself. He said, "The loss of one's patient will forever haunt any moral doctor. Whatever determination you may decree cannot be worse than this pain. This pain alone, I assure you, would be sufficient to deter any physician from making the same mistake in the future. But my pain is even greater than that. If you could see the look of disappointment in the eyes of my son, the look of fear in my daughter's eyes, if you could see the pain in my wife and my mother's heart, the disgrace in failing your father's memory and reputation, you would know the pain I feel every moment." Oh boy. Just the other day, Sean Combs was sentenced, and I mean, it's just these people, these narcissists, the statements that they release upon, their sentencing is just such BS.
Yes, for sure.
It may have sounded heartfelt at first, but listen closely. Every word was about his pain, his humiliation, his loss of face. Not Sarah, not Dan, not the young life cut short. With Anthony, it was always about Anthony. In the end, the judge followed the DA's recommendation: 6 months in prison, 5 years probation, and a $2,500 fine. It was a slap on the wrist. Many of his former patients were angry, disappointed that he wouldn't serve real time for what he'd done. Still, there was some relief. At least, finally, Dr. Anthony Pignataro would never practice medicine again.
What do you think about that sentence?
I mean, it's very light. It makes me mad.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if there were other patients that must have had some lingering problems from, the surgeries that he performed.
Yeah, there definitely were. I didn't find a lot of information about the other patients other than Terry Lamarty, who we talked about, but there were definitely others.
If Anthony kept his nose clean, he would only serve about 4 months behind bars, so he tried to keep his head down. But there was one problem. For years, Anthony had been feeding an addiction by stealing painkillers from patients, from Debbie, from anywhere he could. Now locked away, he had no supply. That's when another inmate, Arnie Ledovich, took him under his wing.
I should mention Arnie Ledovich is a pseudonym that Anne Rule used in her book.
Arnie told Anthony that he could smuggle heroin into the prison. For Anthony, heroin was an easy substitute for the painkillers he craved. Life inside wasn't easy for the once flamboyant doctor. He wasn't allowed to wear his toupee and his bald head with metal screws sticking out true stairs.
I love this.
I'm
this
so
picture.
sorry for laughing, but
it is really funny to think about.
I'm a little obsessed with these screws and the whole toupee business.
I know.
Other prisoners called him Frankenstein and figured he was a lunatic. Despite the humiliation, Anthony had steady support. Debbie, the kids, and his mother visited faithfully twice a week. He called them collect whenever he could and exchanged letters with his children. Debbie clung to hope. Maybe this would finally change him. Maybe prison would break through his arrogance. Anthony spent much of his time working out, and when he was released after just 4 months, he bragged that he was in the best physical shape of his life. But he's like completely addicted to heroin at this point, right?
Yes.
Back home, he played the role of family man. His first day back, he watched hours of Ralph's junior high football games on video. The season Anthony had missed while locked up, Ralph, the undefeated quarterback, was overjoyed that his dad finally seemed interested. Anthony also paid attention to Lauren's gymnastics, encouraging her routines. For Debbie, it was like the husband she always wanted had finally come home. He wasn't drinking, he was attentive. He even threw himself into his community service at a therapeutic writing center for underprivileged and disabled kids. The work seemed to soften him, to give him purpose. The couple capped off this new beginning by renewing their wedding vows at the very church where they'd first been married. For Debbie, it was a symbol of their fresh start, a promise that maybe, just maybe, the worst was finally behind them. So what were they doing for money?
We'll talk a little more about that, but Debbie was working. Anthony was going to try to find a job out of prison, but they always had his mother to fall back on. His parents had a lot of money.
Oh, okay.
His dad was gone, so Lena, his mom, was always willing to help out as well.
Okay. And again, I don't think if we mentioned this in part 2, but his father was a well-known physician who had passed away not that long before, right?
Right.
We'll be back after a break.
But the fresh start didn't last long. Anthony's mistress, Tammy, had never really gone away. She had written to him while he was in prison, and he had written back. Tammy's jealous ex-boyfriend, who happened to be a lawyer, discovered the affair and decided to blow it up. He mailed Debbie a letter exposing Anthony's relationship with Tammy and enclosed one of Anthony's prison love letters as proof. This is the second time now that Debbie has found out about an affair in kind of a weird way, like from somebody sending her something or sharing something, proof of Anthony's infidelity.
That does seem very cruel.
Yeah,
but I'm not sure
kinda.
what the best way to find out that your spouse is having an affair, but
Yeah, probably no good way, but that does seem
No.
especially...
especially during this time when Debbie is having this new sense that they're having a fresh start and maybe Anthony has changed. So it must
Right.
have been particularly devastating at that time.
Well, for Debbie, it was crushing. She had stood by Anthony through humiliation, disgrace, and prison. She had renewed her vows, convinced herself that he had finally changed, and now this. She felt like a fool. But instead of confronting him with rage, Debbie played it cool. She showed him the letter, pretended she was willing to move past it, and quietly began calculating her next steps. What would be best for her children? Could she finally break free? And as much as she hated to admit it, some part of her still loved him. Meanwhile, Anthony was drifting. He couldn't land a job, not that he seemed to be trying very hard. Their finances were in free fall, and it was only Anthony's mother, Lena, who kept the family afloat. Anthony bought Debbie a new Cadillac as a celebration of their renewed vows, but of course, he drove it most of the time. To Anthony, appearances mattered more than anything. A man had to look successful, even if he was broke. He also reconnected with his old prison heroin supplier, Arnie Ledovich. Arnie had been released around the same time, and the two began shooting up heroin together. Sometimes Anthony even brought Tammy along. Debbie knew something was wrong. He was constantly withdrawing money from their bank account, always dazed and checked out. Then, one day in late February 1999, she happened to drive by Tammy's house. Parked in the driveway was her Cadillac, the car that Anthony had claimed for himself. That was a breaking point. Debbie pulled in, left her minivan in Tammy's driveway, and drove the Cadillac home. That's a good way to send a message, huh?
Yeah.
When Anthony saw the minivan, he knew instantly what had happened. He called Debbie, desperate, insisting, "It's not what it looks like." Debbie hung up. She was fed up. She changed the locks on the house, drained nearly all the money from their joint bank account, leaving only $5,000 behind. Message received, Anthony moved into an apartment of his own. He called home daily to speak with Ralph and Lauren, but Debbie refused to speak with him. The fallout with Anthony sent Debbie spiraling. She sank into a deep depression. Her neck injuries left her in constant pain, which made it almost impossible to sleep. Exhausted and overwhelmed, she turned to a psychiatrist who prescribed Xanax. It helped a little, but never enough. 2 days after finding her Cadillac parked at Tammy's house, Debbie hit a breaking point. She took 2 Xanax. When the pills didn't seem to help, she swallowed 2 more. Her thoughts dulled, her body heavy. She reached out for more again. The moment the last pills went down, panic set in. She realized she might have gone too far. Desperate, she called her mother, who immediately dialed 911. Debbie was hospitalized for a couple of days, just long enough for the excess Xanax to clear from her system. Later, she insisted it wasn't a suicide attempt. She wasn't trying to end her life, she said. She just felt exhausted from the pain, from the sleepless nights, from Anthony's betrayals. She wanted relief, not death. But regardless of her intent, the incident left a mark. And soon, what Debbie saw as a moment of weakness would come back to haunt her in ways that she could never have imagined. Through all of this, Anthony's mother, Lena, had always been his fiercest defender. To her, Anthony could do no wrong. Debbie, with her blue-collar background, had never measured up in Lena's eyes. But Anthony's affair with Tammy crossed a line that even Lena couldn't ignore. Furious that her son had destroyed his family, she unleashed her anger in a blistering letter. "I'm not playing games with you now or ever," she wrote. "You and your whore deserve each other. I hate you both. If you think you can do this to your family and get away with it, you are nuts. I will not let you hurt or scar my grandchildren. I will get even with you before I die. You don't deserve the Pignataro name." She went,
Wow.
I know, this is a brutal letter to receive from your mom.
Way to go, Lena.
She went further. She told Anthony she was cutting him out of her will, that he shouldn't bother showing up to her funeral, and that she intended to advise Debbie to sue him. She closed with a line that must have stung. "I never thought I would say it, but I'm glad Daddy's gone. He can't see what you are doing to us." The letter hit its mark. For once, Anthony seemed truly remorseful. He began showing up at the house, playing the role of the repentant husband, apologetic, attentive, considerate. When Debbie underwent her 5th neck surgery that April, Anthony was suddenly the picture of support. He visited her in the hospital, cared for the kids, and presented himself as the best version of Anthony Pignataro.
Yeah, we've seen that before, Anthony.
With Anthony, that best version never lasted long. Even as Anthony played the part of the reformed husband, Debbie couldn't shake her unease. She was nervous about being alone in the house, especially after Anthony told her he had received a death threat. Then came the vandalism. One night, someone spray-painted "Killer, Killer, Killer" across her sliding glass doors and scrawled "Die, fucker" on the fence. Debbie was terrified. She reported it to the police, but there were no leads. What nagged at her was the silence of her dog Polo. Polo barked at everyone, delivery drivers, neighbors, strangers walking by. But the night of the vandalism, Polo hadn't made a sound. There was one person he never barked at, and that was Anthony. In May, Anthony asked if he could spend the night. Debbie hadn't been sleeping well, and with the vandalism still fresh in her mind, she wanted the security of another adult in the house. She asked him point blank if he was still seeing Tammy. He swore it was over, and Debbie agreed to let him stay. Around the same time, Anthony lined up a job interview in Philadelphia with a surgical supply company. Driving across state lines was a clear violation of his probation, but he went anyway. He didn't get the job. By the summer, Anthony was spending more and more time at the duplex. His clothes disappeared from his apartment and reappeared in Debbie's closet. By July of 1999, he was essentially back home. Debbie, still shaken by threats and vandalism, decided it was safer, easier, to let him back in for good.
Anthony decided what the family needed was a change of scenery. All of his siblings had moved to Florida. One was a physician. The others ran a string of Dairy Queen franchises. So in Florida, you can probably leave your Dairy Queen open year-round. Here, if you're in Florida, we close them.
That's right.
Around this time of year, they're closed usually till March.
Exactly.
Anthony figured they could find a place for him there, maybe managing the family business, maybe reinventing himself. There was just one problem: probation. He wasn't allowed to leave New York. His lawyer thought transferring probation to Florida wouldn't be difficult, but then Judge Tillis reviewed the request, and he flatly denied it. The judge explained his concern. Florida was too close to Puerto Rico, where Anthony had gone to medical school, and the rest of the Caribbean. If Anthony wanted to vanish and quietly start practicing medicine again, it would be far too easy. Anthony was furious, but Debbie felt a quiet sense of relief. She didn't want to uproot her children or leave behind her mother and brother. Still, the family needed income. With Anthony unemployable, Debbie took a job as a receptionist in a pediatrician's office. Her modest paycheck, supplemented by Lena's support, was all that kept the household afloat. Not long after Anthony began working his way back into Debbie's home and good graces, her health began to falter. In May, she was struck with sudden, excruciating stomach pain and rushed to the ER. The doctors suspected pancreatitis. When the pain subsided, they sent her home, and Debbie chalked it up to stress. God knew she'd had enough of that. But the relief didn't last. Over the next month, Debbie continued to feel sick. She had waves of severe abdominal pain, bouts of vomiting, and a constant bloated, distended feeling. Eating became difficult. Food wouldn't stay down. As the weeks went by, her strength drained away. Some days she couldn't do anything but lie in bed. She stopped wanting to leave the house. There were good days and bad days, but no pattern, no explanation. Anthony suddenly became the picture of a devoted husband, stepping in to care for Debbie and the children. Her mother pitched in too, picking up groceries and helping around the house. By July, the bad days outnumbered the good. Debbie began missing work more and more. Food tasted strange, metallic. Her memory faltered. Life blurred into a haze. One day she was so disoriented that she wandered into a neighbor's home without realizing it. She couldn't explain what she was doing there. On July 21st, she was hospitalized again. Doctors remained convinced it was pancreatitis, but couldn't explain the cause. When asked what she had eaten, Debbie struggled to remember. Finally, she recalled a bowl of Lipton soup Anthony had made for her just before her symptoms had worsened. Her daughter Lauren had eaten some too, and within hours was violently ill, vomiting, and missing her gymnastics meet. Doctors kept Debbie in the hospital for 4 days, but answers never came. On July 25th, she was once again discharged. The next 2 weeks at home were a blur. Debbie's health spiraled. On August 8th, a friend stopped by and was horrified by her appearance. Debbie was gaunt, weak, barely able to stand. The friend confronted Anthony. "Shouldn't Debbie be in the hospital?" Anthony snapped. "I'm a doctor. Don't you think I would know what's best for her? She's much better off under my supervision." To other friends and family, he brushed it off. "Oh, she'll be all right. Just a little virus." But Debbie wasn't all right. By now, she could barely walk. Her limbs alternated between numbness and agonizing pain. Finally, Anthony relented and took her back to the hospital. Doctors ran test after test. Lyme disease? Unlikely. Guillain-Barré? No. Meningitis? Spinal Tap ruled it out. Despite their efforts, they were baffled. Debbie's condition was worsening, and no one could explain why. At last, doctors began to suspect something beyond illness. They considered toxins. Debbie loved gardening. She could have accidentally ingested a chemical or fertilizer. They ran urine tests for possible poisons. The results stunned them. Debbie's body contained arsenic, not just a trace, but a massive, almost unimaginable amount. More than 29,000 micrograms per liter. It was a number so high that doctors could barely process it. They had never seen anything like it before. Frankly, they couldn't believe Debbie was still alive. Suddenly, all her baffling symptoms fell into place. The numbness and memory loss pointed to chronic exposure, small doses of arsenic over time. The waves of vomiting, diarrhea, and agonizing pain were signs of acute exposure, a massive dose given all at once. Someone had been poisoning Debbie. Anthony, of course, rejected the diagnosis. He insisted the doctors were wrong. In his medical opinion, Debbie simply needed her gallbladder removed. He practically demanded they perform a cholecystectomy. Her doctors refused. Surgery in her fragile state would have been a death sentence. Instead, they started Debbie on chelation therapy, a grueling treatment that uses binding agents to pull arsenic from the body so that it can be excreted. But Debbie's levels were so dangerously high that even with treatment, survival was far from certain. The process would take 19 long days, and no one knew if she had that much time. So we've done other cases where we've had arsenic
Hmm.
poisoning, and Debbie is really lucky that she's still alive at this point because some
Yeah,
people, like their bodies just shut down. I remember Autumn Klein was a case that I did not that long ago, and yeah, she was in really, really bad shape.
it is really amazing that she was still alive.
By law, a diagnosis of arsenic poisoning had to be reported to authorities. For the DA and investigators, Pat Finnerty and Chuck Craven, the same team who had worked on the Sarah Smith case, the news came as no surprise. Another woman close to Anthony Pignataro was in critical condition. They contacted Poison Control to get expert advice. When they explained that the patient's arsenic levels were over 29,000 micrograms per liter, the expert interrupted. "When's the funeral?" Hearing that Debbie was still alive left them stunned. Investigators sat down with Anthony and asked him directly, "Did you try to kill your wife?" Anthony looked down, hesitated, then muttered, "Well, I can see how someone would think that." It wasn't a confession, but his body language told the investigators everything they needed to know. Anthony tried to spin the story. He admitted he and Debbie had marital problems, but insisted those were behind them. Then he floated his own theories. Maybe terrorists had poisoned the county's water supply.
Makes perfect sense,
Oh my
doesn't it?
goodness. But no one else in the neighborhood was sick. When that didn't stick, he blamed Dan Smith, the widower of Sarah Smith, suggesting this was his revenge. But Dan had moved away long ago, and the evidence showed Debbie had been poisoned repeatedly over time. That theory didn't hold much water either. Meanwhile, Debbie began to rally. On August 27th, she left the ICU. The numbness in her arms and legs had turned into searing pain, which to the doctors was actually a hopeful sign that her nerves weren't completely destroyed. It looked like she would survive, but recovery would be long. Doctors doubted she'd ever walk again. Physical therapy focused on her arms and hands in the hope that she could one day at least feed herself and hold a pen. Strangely, Debbie never asked how she could have been poisoned. Maybe she didn't want to know, or maybe she was in denial. She even suggested that Anthony and the children be tested for arsenic exposure, remembering how Lauren had been sick after the Lipton soup. All of them tested within a normal range, though Lauren's levels were slightly elevated. Debbie's mental faculties are still okay.
I think so, yeah. I think she went through a period where she was in a fog,
Mhm.
but I think as she recovered in the hospital, her mental acuity came back.
That's amazing. Family tensions boiled over at the hospital. Anthony's mother, Lena, who had briefly turned against her son after the affair, was now firmly back in his corner. With Debbie fighting for her life, Lena showed up to lash out at her daughter-in-law. "You did this to yourself, and you're trying to frame my son," she snapped. "If you really believe that, then get out of here," Debbie shot back. "You know what you did, you liar, liar," Lena screamed. Debbie's brother Carmine ordered her to leave, and she never visited again. That is nuts.
It really is. And
She knew who her son was.
yeah, and Debbie never once even accused Anthony of doing it. So it wasn't
Yeah.
like Debbie was trying to frame him. Lena seemed like even the letter that she wrote to Anthony that we read a little bit of earlier, she just seems to kind of, she seems sort of extreme. Like she kind of goes from one extreme to the other. Like, Anthony, you're the worst person in the world. Debbie, you're trying to frame my son for
Yeah.
murder.
Anthony, in contrast, was the picture of devotion. He visited Debbie every day, reassuring her that they were a team and needed to stick together. Investigators pressed on. They collected a sample of Debbie's hair, knowing arsenic leaves a timeline in the strands. The results were damning. Debbie's arsenic levels were normal until June, when they began to creep upward. In July, they spiked dramatically. Between August 10th and August 26th, the levels surged again, showing 2 massive doses layered on top of weeks of chronic exposure.
It's been one of the most interesting things I've learned in doing these cases when there's arsenic poisoning, that the hair is essentially like a timeline.
Yeah,
It's
that is really
It's
interesting.
really cool.
The conclusion was undeniable. Debbie had been poisoned deliberately, repeatedly, with both small daily doses and at least 2 major attempts to finish her off. Investigators were certain Anthony was responsible, but they faced 2 problems. Debbie wasn't turning on her husband, and they still hadn't found the source of the arsenic. A search of the home turned up nothing. Lauren mentioned that her father once placed small tins of ant poison around the house, but none were recovered. We'll be back after a break.
While Debbie was still in the hospital fighting to recover, she and Anthony were blindsided. Both were served with a petition alleging that Ralph and Lauren were neglected children. The state was considering removing them from their parents' custody. For Debbie, it was humiliating. She believed it stemmed from her request that the children be tested for arsenic. Instead of protecting them, she was now accused of failing them. For the time being, the kids were placed with Debbie's brother Carmine and his wife. Meanwhile, investigators looking into Debbie's poisoning caught a break, and it came from an unlikely source. Arnie Ledovich, Anthony's old prison buddy and heroin supplier, saw the news about Debbie's poisoning and contacted authorities. By then, Arnie was in custody on misdemeanor drug charges. The DA made it clear there would be no deals. The only thing they could offer was immunity for whatever he revealed. Arnie didn't care. He didn't want leniency. What he asked for instead was help getting into a long-term rehab program. And then he dropped the bomb. Anthony, he said, had a girlfriend named Tammy. The authorities weren't aware of his girlfriend. The three of them, Anthony, Tammy, and Arnie, had done heroin together on multiple occasions, but that wasn't all. Back in May, Anthony had asked Arnie where he could get poison. At first, Arnie brushed it off, but in June, Anthony raised the subject again. He claimed that Debbie was driving him crazy, checking up on him constantly. She had to go, Anthony told him. That was right around the time Debbie first began feeling sick. Arnie told investigators he had made plenty of mistakes as a drug addict, but murder wasn't one of them. He wanted no part of Anthony's plans. He agreed to cooperate to make sure Anthony could never hurt anyone again. Investigators cross-checked his story against phone logs and prison records. The relationship between Anthony and Arnie was real, their contact undeniable. Everything lined up. For the first time, investigators had a credible insider willing to testify. Through all of this, Debbie still wasn't ready to turn against Anthony. The DA knew they needed her cooperation, so they sent in Sharon Simon, their victim's advocate, to build trust. It worked. Sharon and Debbie connected almost immediately. Sharon became less like an advocate and more like a therapist. She gently asked Debbie about her childhood, about losing her baby girl, about losing her father. Slowly, Debbie opened up. Over time, Sharon helped Debbie see something that she hadn't admitted to herself. Somewhere along the way, she had lost her own identity. She had poured herself into Anthony's career, into keeping their marriage together, into raising her children. There was nothing left for herself. She couldn't imagine a life without Anthony, because her whole world had been built around him. Sharon didn't push too hard, but she sensed the truth. Deep down, Debbie knew who had poisoned her. She just wasn't ready to face it. The final straw came in mid-September. Debbie was still in the hospital when Anthony stopped by for one of his daily visits. Not long after, Dennis Cinta, a family law attorney married to Debbie's cousin Maria, walked into the room. He had been helping her with the child neglect case, but that wasn't why he was there that day. Dennis glared at Anthony and snapped, "Get out and don't come back." Startled, Anthony left. Then Dennis turned to Debbie. He told her what he had discovered. While she lay in the ICU fighting for her life, Anthony had sent a card to his girlfriend. "If you knew how much I missed you," he wrote, "you would be with me." Anthony had sworn that affair was long over. It wasn't. Dennis didn't mince words. If Debbie wanted her children back, she had to cut Anthony out of her life. She couldn't have both. It was Anthony or the kids. For Debbie, the decision was devastating but clear. With tears in her eyes, she told her family she didn't want Anthony visiting her anymore. For the first time, Debbie chose herself and her children over Anthony. In October, still confined to a hospital bed, Debbie twitched her fingers, then lifted one leg. The nurses burst into tears. After weeks of uncertainty, it felt like a small miracle. But miracles don't pay hospital bills. By the end of the month, Debbie's insurance was running out. Her options were grim: transfer to a nursing home-style rehab facility, or go home and somehow assemble 24-hour care that she couldn't afford. Her mother offered to help, but she couldn't be there around the clock. That's when Debbie's friend Shelley stepped forward. Debbie protested. It was too much to ask, but Shelley insisted. For the next 6 months, Shelley arrived at Debbie's door every morning at 6 a.m. She dressed her, brushed her teeth, did her hair, applied her makeup, the rituals that make a person feel like themselves. Then, every 4 hours, Shelley returned to help with whatever Debbie needed.
Shelley sounds like an amazing friend.
I know, that's
So selfless.
Yes. Meanwhile, the children were still living with Debbie's brother while the neglect case worked its way through the courts. Both parents had visitation. Debbie kept her distance from Anthony, seeing him only when their visits happened back to back. Anthony had moved in with his mother. Any chance he got, he begged Debbie to let him come home. But she stayed firm. After everything, the lies, the affairs, the poisoning, she was finally done for good.
Did he know the position that he put her in with the children?
I think Anthony didn't think about those things. It was all about himself. He didn't really care.
But if she let him back in the home, she was endangering her custody of her children, right?
Yeah, I don't think he probably saw it that way.
Investigators were still hunting for the source of the arsenic. Their only lead was something Debbie's daughter Lauren had mentioned. She'd seen her dad putting out little tins of ant poison around the house. They knew that taro ant killer, a common household product, had contained arsenic decades earlier and had even been used in several infamous spousal poisonings. But when they contacted the company, they learned taro hadn't used arsenic for years. The taro representative did, however, point them toward another manufacturer, Grand Slab in California. They still produced an ant killer containing arsenic trioxide. When investigators called the company's COO, he confirmed it. Their ant killer contained between 0.35 and 0.46% arsenic trioxide and was sold in small round tins similar to what Lauren had described. At that concentration, roughly 8 tins would hold enough poison to deliver a fatal dose to a 150-pound adult.
This really surprised me that at this time in the late 1990s that you could still buy ant poison containing arsenic. I assumed it had been banned long before that.
We used to use those things all the time.
Yeah, I know.
Remember our old house? We had like parades of ants.
Oh, yeah.
That just laughed at us every time whatever we put out.
Right. Yeah. But from what I understand today, no ant poisoning or insecticide contains arsenic anymore.
Good to know. Checking locally, investigators discovered that a Target store in the Buffalo suburb, Cheektowaga, stocked the Grand Slab's product. Anthony could have walked in and purchased it without anyone noticing if he paid cash. There would be no paper trail. Anthony's credit card records did show purchases at that Target store, giving investigators a circumstantial link. But if he'd actually bought the ant killer there, he'd been smart enough to pay cash. By early 2000, the DA worried that Anthony was preparing to run. They still didn't have enough to charge him with Debbie's poisoning, but they did have leverage, violations of his probation. Investigators had uncovered 2 major breaches. Anthony had crossed state lines for that Philadelphia job interview, and he'd been using drugs. Both were clear violations. On February 1st, 2000, Anthony was arrested and taken into custody. Lena posted his $50,000 bail, but this time he was ordered to wear an electronic ankle bracelet. Only days later, Anthony made another mistake. He called Debbie, despite a no-contact order. Debbie reported this violation. Anthony was hauled back to jail, and this time his bail was set so high that even Lena couldn't cover it. Anthony was stunned. To him, Debbie's decision to report the call wasn't just compliance with the law, it was betrayal. It may have been the moment he realized for the first time that he had truly lost her. In March 2000, Anthony was sentenced to between 16 and 48 months in prison for violating probation. Wow, that's pretty steep.
I guess when you violate probation, your sentence is essentially going to prison for the rest of the term of your probation, and he was on a 5-year probation period.
Okay. And then his problems got even worse. A month later, an Erie County grand jury heard the evidence in Debbie's poisoning. On April 27th, Anthony Pignataro was indicted for attempted murder in the 2nd degree, assault in the 1st degree, and 3 counts of criminal possession of a controlled substance in the 7th degree. While the criminal case moved forward, the family court hearings dragged on. Debbie was frustrated. She had fought to survive arsenic poisoning, and still she didn't have her children back. Caseworkers knew the truth. Debbie was blameless. She was a good mother. Quietly, they allowed Ralph and Lauren to spend more time at home, but officially, the children remained in limbo. The main obstacle was the Xanax overdose from the year before, which some still labeled as a suicide attempt. That single incident hung over Debbie's head like a cloud. A trial on the child neglect charges was scheduled for June 13th, 2000. Both Debbie and Anthony would stand as defendants. In the middle of it all, Ralph turned 13, and he decided to write his father a letter in prison. It wasn't the kind of letter a child should ever have to write. Ralph confronted his dad directly. "Why are you telling people Mom put you in jail? Why are you feeding Grandma lies about her? What about the heroin? And heroin with Tammy? Why did you have to be so stupid? Even I know better. You're a doctor. You should definitely know right from wrong. That was wrong." He begged his father to stop poisoning his relationship with Lena, to take responsibility, to help his family. "Please help out, Dad," he wrote. "I know you want to in your heart." Anthony's reply? In essence, none of it was his fault. At the June hearing, the judge delivered his verdict. Anthony was guilty of child neglect. Debbie was found innocent. And then the judge turned to Anthony and spoke words that cut like a knife. "You are a miserable human being who failed everybody. You have done something that is so wrong. You have destroyed your life and inflicted incredible physical and psychological pain on your wife." At long last, Ralph and Lauren were officially allowed to come home and live with Debbie. Do you sometimes wish that you could be a judge so
Say
you could
things like that.
deliver like these just
Yes.
hurt? Yeah.
I love it when I read something like that for someone who so richly deserves to hear those words.
But Anthony probably did not hear the words.
No, I'm sure he didn't.
Even as the family court battle played out, the DA pressed forward with the poisoning case. A trial date was set for October 2000. Once again, Anthony scoffed at the idea of a plea deal. The problem for prosecutors was that the case was almost entirely circumstantial. Anthony had the motive and the opportunity, but there was no direct evidence tying him to the arsenic. They had Arnie Ledovich's testimony, but every defense attorney loves to dismantle the credibility of a jailhouse snitch. Then, almost like a floodgate opened, more informants began pouring in. The prosecutor later joked, "We've never had so many informants. We had a conga line of them coming across Delaware Avenue to tell us about Anthony Pignataro." One was a former patient who claimed Anthony had once said he needed to find someone to kill his wife. 3 more were inmates who said that during his current stint in prison, Anthony had been putting out feelers for a hitman to silence Arnie Ledovich. In Anthony's mind, Arnie was the only thing standing between him and an acquittal. In August, investigators arranged for one of the informants to connect Anthony with the supposed hitman, who was in reality an undercover Erie County deputy fluent in Spanish.
Apparently, Anthony thought that if he spoke Spanish to this alleged hitman on his prison call, that the people listening in to the prison calls wouldn't pick up on what he was talking about.
Yeah. On a recorded call, Anthony offered $10,000 to have Arnie killed. He even provided details about how and when he would deliver payment. That tape was a game changer. The DA brought it straight to Anthony's lawyer, warning that new charges for conspiracy to commit murder were about to be added. Suddenly, Anthony's defiance evaporated. Backed into a corner, Anthony agreed to a deal. He would plead guilty to a lesser charge, withdraw all his motions, and waive his right to appeal. He would admit to poisoning Debbie and supposedly reveal where he got the arsenic. The last part, though, he never followed up on. Authorities never learned exactly how he obtained the poison. In exchange, Anthony's sentence was capped at between 5 and 15 years. Sentencing was scheduled for early 2001. For Debbie, Anthony's admission was more than just legal leverage. It was validation. After years of betrayal, denial, and manipulation, he had finally admitted what he had done. It lifted a weight off her shoulders and gave her the freedom to move on. In October 2000, she filed for divorce.
As his sentencing date approached, Anthony turned once again to manipulation. His best hope for leniency, he decided, was Debbie. He wrote letters to her and the kids, begging for forgiveness, asking her to write a supportive letter to the judge. He also wrote to his mother, Lena, instructing her to pressure Debbie on his behalf. In that letter, Anthony's words revealed his true mindset. Even if it's all phony and you don't truly mean it, you could do it for me. You will never have to see her again anyway. What she tells Judge Rossetti will determine how much time he gives me. Every day that you save me is worth it. You wouldn't have to see her. You could just call on the phone and be nice. I know it would kill you, but it will help me. But even Lena, his most loyal defender, couldn't bring herself to make that call. By this point, she despised Debbie too much, and she wasn't willing to swallow her pride, even for her son. It really bothers me that Lena hates Debbie so much. Like, Debbie is completely blameless in all of this. I understand, like, wanting to stand by your child, but just seems a little out of touch.
Yeah, definitely.
Debbie, however, did write a letter to the judge, but it wasn't the glowing endorsement that Anthony had imagined. Instead, she laid bare the truth: Anthony's infidelities, his broken promises, the years she had spent trapped in his shadow. She described her long, painful recovery. She could now walk without braces, bathe and feed herself, even drive, but her body was still numb, her legs aching constantly, her hands unable to perform fine motor tasks. She told the judge she wasn't seeking revenge, she only wanted to protect her children, and she would never feel safe with Anthony free on the streets. At sentencing, Anthony pleaded for mercy, portraying himself as a man who deserved a second chance. But Judge Rossetti wasn't swayed. Anthony had been given chance after chance and squandered them all. The judge handed down the maximum, 15 years, the top of the range, and when it came to whether the sentence would run concurrently or consecutively with the 4-year term he was already serving for probation violation, the judge again showed no mercy. The sentences would be consecutive. Rossetti also signed an order of protection for Debbie and the children to last 3 years after Anthony's eventual release. 1 week later, Debbie's divorce was finalized. After years of abuse, betrayal, and survival against the odds, she was finally free. With time off for good behavior, Anthony Pignataro walked free in 2013 after serving 13 years. He was 55 years old. Most people would assume that after poisoning your wife, losing your medical license, and spending over a decade in prison, you might try to keep a low profile. Not Anthony. A couple years after his release, a new business popped up in West Seneca, Tony Haute Cosmetique and Skincare. The business's website introduced Tony Haute as a renowned scientist and physician. Locals squinted at the headshot on the site. The slick-looking Tony Haute bore a suspicious resemblance to a disgraced plastic surgeon they remembered from the evening news. Reporters dug deeper, and sure enough, Tony Haute was none other than Anthony Pignataro, now operating under a new, fancier name. Apparently, in Anthony's mind, you could just swap your last name for something French-sounding and pretend the whole murder and poisoning thing had never happened. His website advertised the first and only skincare system formulated from one's own DNA-derived plasma. He had even managed to get a patent for some pseudo-scientific process to treat skin imperfections. Neighbors weren't impressed. They told reporters that there were constant deliveries of surgical supplies and a steady stream of women coming and going late at night. One neighbor summed it up perfectly. Some real weird stuff happens there. When journalists confronted Tony Haute for comment, he clammed up. Soon after, the state opened an investigation, and just like that, Tony Haute vanished, shutting down his website, closing his business, and packing up for Florida.
Wow.
Florida business records show that in August 2017, Tony Haute resurfaced yet again. He registered not one but 2 new ventures, Tony Haute Cosmetique LLC and Haute Medical LLC. On the paperwork, the registered agent was listed as Anthony Haute, MD. Apparently, though, even Anthony realized that 2 more fake companies might not be the best look, because within a year both were quietly dissolved. But Anthony is nothing if not persistent. In 2019, he popped up in perhaps his most surreal disguise yet, as a trustworthy senior caregiver on the website eldercare.com. Listed simply as Anthony H., he claimed qualifications in administering medications, performing assessments, and providing respite care. Someone who recognized his photo immediately alerted the Buffalo DA, but there wasn't much they could do. As long as he wasn't claiming to be a doctor, There was nothing technically illegal about Anthony offering his services as a caregiver. Terrifying, maybe. Illegal, no. By 2020, Anthony had formed yet another Florida entity, Hote Enterprises. That company is still active today, though what exactly Anthony is doing with it, if anything, remains a mystery. The last sighting that I found of him was from his Facebook page in January 2024. There he was, Anthony Hote, glaring into the camera with a full, obviously fake-looking head of hair trying to smolder. At 66 years old, he looked less like a disgraced surgeon and more like a B-movie villain who just won't stay dead.
Wow. Was he smoldering or smizing?
What is smizing? I don't know. I'm not familiar with that word.
It's a Tara Banks, America's top next top model reference, I believe.
We'll post the picture of him from Facebook, but it made me laugh because he looks like he is just looking into the camera like he is trying to seduce the camera.
What was the Facebook post for?
It was just a picture of himself.
Okay.
In the years after Sarah's death, Dan Smith rebuilt his life. He eventually remarried to his wife, Carrie, and together they raised 4 children, 2 from his life with Sarah and 2 more that they welcomed into the family. Sarah's mother, Barb Grafton, became grandma to all of them. She spends holidays with Dan's family, woven into their lives as family. That part really touched me because, Sarah's mom, the fact that Dan still included her as family, even with their new children, I just think that was really heartwarming.
Very classy.
Still, the past lingers. After learning about Debbie Pignataro's poisoning, Dan carried a burden of guilt. He said, "I thought Debbie and their children would be better off if they had their father come home to them. I was wrong, and in a way I blame myself that Debbie got poisoned. I never thought he would hurt his own family." If you remember, Dan, he really didn't lobby for for Anthony to have a long prison sentence. He just wanted his license taken away.
Absolutely not his fault.
No, not at all. Debbie survived, but the arsenic left scars that she'll carry forever. She regained her mobility, but not fully. The numbness, the pain, the loss of fine motor control, these are permanent reminders of what she endured. And yet, Debbie found the strength to move forward. As of 2020, she was still living in Buffalo, a grandmother herself, finding joy in watching her grandsons play football. After years of silence, she finally shared her story, not for sympathy, but to give other women the courage to leave abusive relationships before it's too late. 2 women, 2 very different stories. Sarah, whose life was stolen at just 26. Debbie, who fought to survive against impossible odds. Both are reminders of the devastation left in Anthony Pignataro's wake, and both are reminders of the strength that it takes to endure and to choose life beyond abuse. Rest in peace, Sarah, and Debbie, we hope that you're still finding peace, joy, and healing in the life that you've rebuilt.
Heartbreaking. It was simply heartbreaking that Debbie has to wake up every morning and, be reminded instantly when she tries to get out of bed of what her ex-husband put her through.
Yeah.
And he is free and, who knows what he's doing. He'll find a way to hurt someone else again if he hasn't already, I'm sure.
Yeah, it just seems like he is just bent on,
Well, he's this, medical, expert.
Yeah,
and
he's just a brilliant guy, so he's got to offer his services to the world in some way or another. I have a few questions for you. One thing, I wanted to talk about motive a little bit because I think his motive in poisoning Debbie is a little bit confusing. There was a little bit of life insurance, but there wasn't a lot. It wasn't a huge amount of life insurance that would, change his life or make him set for life or anything like that. So that probably wasn't a motive. The other possible motive is that he wanted to get rid of Debbie so that to make it easier for him to move to the Caribbean and start medicine. But even that doesn't seem very likely. The interesting thing that the DA said, they were speculating that his motive might have been that he wanted Debbie to die in surgery. You remember he was pushing the doctors to remove her gallbladder. And the doctors were like, no way, she's too weak. If she undergoes that surgery, she'll probably die. And the DA speculated that for Anthony, that would be vindication if his own wife died in surgery, to basically allow him to say that, see, anybody's wife can die in surgery. I'm curious what you think about that. It's kind of a novel idea, but it's sort of intriguing.
Well, I think it's really interesting that you had the option there to say cholecystectomy, and you said gallbladder removal surgery.
I know. That's just how I am, you know?
That's my takeaway.
Yeah.
No, I think Anthony's a narcissist, and my takeaway is that he just wanted to move on with his life and that she was in the way. He thought that she was expendable and he just wanted her dead. I don't think it went as deep as, trying to prove that people die in surgery every day.
Yeah, you're probably right. One thing I would love to get your opinion on is, Debbie, she stood by Anthony through a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot that went on, infidelity, abuse, his criticism of her. Why do you think she struggled so much to separate and let go of him? It took a long time and a lot for her to finally get to a point where she was ready.
She loved her husband and she wanted to think the best of him, and it just took a really long time for her to realize that he wasn't the man that she thought he was, right? We want to believe the people that we marry are good and have the best intentions, and
it really does take a lot.
Clearly didn't, and it's easy for us to see, you read a book and for you to see, well, clearly this guy was garbage from the beginning. We talk about the bad stuff all the time on our podcast. I don't think we talk about the good stuff, and a lot of times the good stuff isn't in the books, but I'm sure they had moments of love and laughter and warmth together. And they enjoyed, to a certain extent, watching their children grow up together and attend their son's football games. There were probably lovely moments in their marriage, and she hung on to those maybe more than she should have.
Yeah, that's a very good point. What do you make of Anthony's sentence? So he served, 6 months for Sarah's death, and then he got 15 years for poisoning Debbie, which he didn't serve all of that. But what do you think of that sentence? Was justice done?
Obviously, there was not justice there. It's heartbreaking that, Debbie has lifelong injuries from that. And, the poor Sarah lost her life. I mean, it's just really sad that he still, in a lot of these cases, he hurt people and killed 2 people that we know of. And, he's living his life.
Yeah. It's kind of ironic that he got more time for Debbie, who didn't end up dying, although she did end up, suffering for a long time, versus Sarah, who did end up dying. But I think the fact that was, considered more of a medical thing, it was trickier to prove.
I don't think he set out to kill
right,
Sarah.
Exactly. One last question. With Sarah's death, I think that it is really tricky if you're thinking of it from a DA's perspective. When something happens, when someone dies in a medical situation like that, it's not something you normally go after and arrest somebody for, right? Those are handled with
in extreme cases,
lawsuits. Yeah. So do you think the DA handled his crimes appropriately?
Just the general sloppiness of his medical training and the basement office and not having the life-saving equipment that he should have had.
Yeah.
I think that they could have gone after him a little harder, but I know those things are really hard to prove. And sometimes juries, those things are kind of nuanced, and it's hard for juries to really understand that stuff. You did, actually, I thought, a really good job explaining that stuff.
Yeah, it is tricky. I think for a DA who aren't experts in medical procedures and practices, it was probably difficult for them to feel confident in their case, which is why they ended up offering a plea deal. But ultimately, and we talked about it at the end of part 1, you wish that the medical community, the medical licensing board would have found a way to not let him get this far to begin with. It's frustrating that there weren't more checks and balances in place to stop him from...
I mean, it's chilling that he was performing these surgeries and he thought he was some sort of, miracle doctor.
Yeah. I need to mention my main source in this case was Ann Rule's book, Last Dance, Last Chance. So this is actually a book that was a compilation of multiple stories, but this was the main one in the book. She wrote about 300 pages on this, and she interviewed Debbie, interviewed many people involved in the case. And as always, Ann Rule did an amazing job with it.
She rules.
She does.
Sorry,
she did rule.
Bad. This case reminded me so much of Dr. Death. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have listened to Dr. Death. I listened to season 1 and season 2. Chilling.
Yes.
Horrifying. So you listened to?
I listened to season 1. Was season 2 a different story?
Season 2 was Dr. Fata, who is in the Detroit area.
Oh, okay.
So
I don't think I listened to that
one.
But...
Yeah, that one is also just as chilling.
Yeah.
But yeah, you would think that these people would get caught before they do too much damage. But boy, it's super scary.
It really is. Thanks again to Christy for recommending this case. We really appreciate it. A few episodes ago, you told the story of a woman that had gotten engaged to her AI chatbot. Somebody commented on that episode, hey, you should look at the story of this woman who fell in love with a chandelier. And so, of course, that piqued my curiosity. And I Googled that, and it took me down a rabbit hole of people falling in love with inanimate objects. And apparently, it's something that happens. So I've got a few examples here.
All right. Like they're in love with the inanimate object?
Yes.
And they would marry it.
Yes,
if they could.
Exactly. So the example that our listener commented on about the woman and the chandelier, this woman, her name is Amanda Liberty, and she wanted to marry a 91-year-old chandelier. This woman, her name is Amanda Liberty because she previously had been in love with the Statue of Liberty, and she changed her name to Amanda Liberty. But then she moved on, and then she fell in love with a chandelier. And
she changed her name to Amanda Chandelier?
I don't know about that, but I would not be surprised.
I wish I had a chandelier I love that much. I hate our chandeliers in our house.
There were some other examples I found. This is a real thing. Okay. A woman married the Berlin Wall in 1979, and she changed her last name to Berlin Wall. She said, I find long, slim things with horizontal lines very sexy. The Great Wall of China is attractive, but he's too thick. My husband is sexier. But sadly, the Berlin Wall was demolished, so she lost her.
That's tough. So she's a widow now.
She's a widow, yes. Another woman married a large stone from her garden, which I think that may have been more performance art, like she was a performance artist. There was a man who married a Barbie doll. In 2015, a Russian man married a pizza because he said that love between humans is too complicated, but he said that pizza would not reject or betray you. And speaking quite frankly and sincerely, I love it.
Well, that's kind of a fleeting romance there, isn't it? Because pizza doesn't last forever.
It's always going to be
maybe
more,
like
though.
Bologna or something like that, because it has so many preservatives.
Or Twinkies.
Twinkies,
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
And the last one I have is a man who was featured on TLC's My Strange Addiction.
I was gonna mention that show.
It sounds like something that would belong there. He married 15 inflatable animals.
Well, that one I believe a little more. Well, I guess that I'm gonna change my name to Tina Water Flosser.
That's your inanimate object.
I really love my water flosser,
yeah.
And I went to the dentist this week.
Oh, yes.
And the results are pretty good.
Yeah, your dentist was quite happy with your relationship with your water flosser.
Well, my dentist is really, really sweet, and she's always very complimentary of my teeth.
Well, because you have perfect teeth, so.
I mean, I have pretty good teeth, but part of it is because she's my dentist. But yeah, I don't know. What would you marry if you couldn't marry me?
If I had to marry an inanimate object, I think I would marry my desk.
Your desk. Oh.
I spend a lot of time at my desk.
You spend a lot of time. I'm surprised you didn't say chair or your car. You like your car a lot too.
I do like my car, but I really love my desk. It's just so sleek and smooth, and it does adjust to a standing desk. Although you may not know that because I haven't used it as a standing desk in a long time.
Well, I'm not here to poke fun at you. I love you unconditionally, but you do tend to have rose-colored glasses on sometimes when you buy things.
I know.
You're very optimistic.
I know.
Yeah. Because you bought the standing desk because you wanted to stand more.
Yes, and then I bought the little treadmill thing to go under the standing
And then you have the balance board.
I know.
But you had a hard time with the desk treadmill. You said it was...
It's hard to work while you use it, unfortunately, because you're kind of you're bouncing up and down a little bit, and it's harder than I thought, unfortunately.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of what else I really love. Nothing that I'm in a long-term relationship but really love my Awala water bottle.
I think the guy who married the pizza, I can relate to that. I know that pizza is fleeting, but there's always going to be another pizza and then another one after that. So.
But then you're cheating on your original pizza. So there's some infidelity there.
Yeah. In the end of the day, I'm thankful that I don't have to marry an inanimate object. I'm very happy with you.
Well, thanks. Thank you so much. Ditto. Right back at you. I hear it's really tough out there in the dating world.
True.
So my heart goes out to people who are looking for someone special and aren't able to, find their person, because I think it's just getting harder and harder.
Yeah, chandelier might not look so bad.
I read a story today, I think it was in People magazine, about a woman named Lisa who's 42 years old, and she put a billboard up
Oh, really?
marylisa.com.
Wow.
And she is looking for, actually, I think she's 41. And you can go to marylisa.com and you can apply to get to know Lisa. She has, I think it's kind of brilliant.
Really?
She's a really pretty lady. She seems very accomplished, super smart.
I just feel like she's
And
going to get 1,000 people that she's going to
I
have
think
to
she's
try to.
already gotten 1,000 people.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to be, some work weeding through them.
I guess she could be pretty choosy, though, at that point, if she's got that many people responding.
Yeah. So I hope that Lisa finds love.
I hope so,
I
too.
hope everyone out there who is looking for love finds love. Maybe we should have like a dating website.
Oh, that's a good
There's
idea.
this woman that I have followed on and off for years on Instagram. Her name is Kelly Stamps. She lives in Arkansas. She's very religious, and she believes like people should, people who love Jesus will be more likely to find love together.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm not kidding. For 40 couples, she has set up 40 couples and they have married.
Wow.
So I think that's super amazing.
So you think we should start a Love, Marry, Kill dating site for people who love true
I
crime?
think having the title Love, Marry, Kill dating site, that's probably, we're going to have to work on that. We're going to have to work on that.
Yeah, that branding is not
what
the
could
best.
the K stand for? Love, Marry,
Kiss.
Kiss. There you go. Love, Marry, Kiss. Yeah, let's do. Maybe we could do that for Valentine's Day. Set up some true crime lovers. And it like Kelly has the same problem. Like she'll have 40,000 women and 6 guys.
Mm-hmm.
So the 6 guys, their odds are really good. And
Yeah.
I think we have at least 4 male listeners now.
Yeah, exactly.
So those 4.
But how many
not
of them
that it
are
has to
single?
be heterosexual relationships.
That's true, too.
We can open it up.
Sure.
Just love. We believe in love here.
Yeah.
At Love, Marry, Kill.
Love is love. Well, thank you all so much for sticking with us. I know we've had a few long cases lately, but I hope people like the detail that we go into. That's usually the feedback we hear.
I think our listeners know that we like to get as much detail in there as we can. If we can find it. Sometimes you can't find it. I'm working on a case right now that I'm struggling to make long enough.
Yeah.
That's always really frustrating. It's not that those stories aren't worth telling, that they're not good. They're just shorter.
Right.
And
Yeah, this one I thought I wasn't going to be able to find enough because there was a couple of shows and they were good, but I wasn't able to find anything. And then I found that Anne Rule wrote this book. I was like, oh, this is perfect.
That's awesome. Sometimes those shows are wrong too. Like the Oxygen shows, they'll leave out details or they have facts in there that they're making up, which is kind of weird.
That's true. Well, please rate, review, follow, and subscribe. Find us on social media and YouTube, or send us an email at lovemarrykill@gmail.com.
If you're listening on Spotify, we love to see your comments there. 99% of our interaction with our listeners is fabulous. Recently, I've gotten some not so nice comments or people wanting to engage in war. And I'm just never going to engage in war. If you have unkind things to say or you feel differently than we do at the resolution of a case, that's completely fine. But we're always going to choose peace and love.
Until next time.
Don't kill your husband.
And don't kill your wife.